Ethan Blackwood came home from a 3-day business trip well past midnight, exhausted, expecting an empty house. He pushed open his bedroom door and stopped cold. Amelia Carter was there, not in his bed, but curled into the reading chair beside it, asleep, a blanket from the hall closet pulled over her shoulders. "What are you doing in my bedroom?" he demanded, loud enough that she woke instantly, sitting up without a trace of the confusion or panic he expected. Amelia stood, smoothing her uniform, entirely composed. She didn't explain right away. "You told me to wake you," she said, "if you ever stopped breathing." Ethan went very still. For a long moment, neither of them said anything else. "What does that mean?" Ethan finally asked, his anger giving way to something closer to confusion. "Stopped breathing?" "3 weeks ago," Amelia said. "You collapsed in your study. I found you. You asked me not to tell anyone, and to check on you at night, quietly, in case it happened again." Ethan had almost no memory of that conversation. He remembered the collapse itself, vaguely, the way a person remembers the edges of a nightmare. He hadn't remembered asking her for anything. "I don't remember saying that," he admitted. "You were barely conscious," Amelia said. "I don't think you meant for me to actually do it every night. But you did anyway. You didn't tell me to stop." Ethan sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, still catching up to a version of the last 3 weeks he apparently hadn't been fully present for. "How many times?" he asked. 6, Amelia said. Tonight would have been the 7th. He didn't know what to do with that number. It sat in the room between them, heavier than anything either of them said next. Over the following days, Ethan started noticing things about Amelia he'd never paid attention to before. She knew which medication he'd started taking for his blood pressure before his own assistant did. She knew the names of 2 specialists he'd quietly consulted months earlier, appointments he'd never mentioned to anyone in the house. She always seemed to be nearby whenever something was wrong, not intrusively, but with an accuracy that started to feel less like coincidence and more like surveillance. One night, unable to sleep himself for entirely different reasons, Ethan came downstairs at 2 in the morning and found her already awake in the kitchen, a mug of tea in front of her, staring at nothing in particular. She didn't seem surprised to see him. She rarely seemed surprised by anything. Ethan found himself watching her the way he'd once watched competitors across a negotiating table, trying to read what she wasn't saying. He started testing her, in small, half-conscious ways, mentioning a fake symptom to see if she reacted, checking whether items in his medicine cabinet had been moved. Twice, he found things slightly out of place. A supplement bottle turned label out instead of label in, the way he never left it. A count of pills that didn't quite match what he remembered taking. It didn't occur to him yet that someone else might be responsible. It only occurred to him that Amelia knew more about his own body, his own routine than he did, and he didn't yet know whether that made him grateful or afraid. The question, once it formed, wouldn't leave him alone. How would Amelia have known to watch him so closely in the first place, unless something had already gone wrong before that night in his study? He confronted her in the kitchen, sharper than he meant to be. "How long have you actually been watching me?" he demanded. "Because I don't think this started 3 weeks ago." Amelia didn't flinch. "Longer," she admitted. "How much longer?" "Long enough to notice things were wrong before you did." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I can give you right now," Amelia said. Something colder crept into Ethan's voice. "Is that supposed to reassure me? Because right now it sounds like you know a great deal more about what's happening to me than a housekeeper reasonably should." Amelia's expression didn't change, but something in her posture straightened, like she'd been bracing for exactly this question. "If you think I had anything to do with what's happening to you," she said, "you're welcome to check the security footage from every night I've sat in that chair. I'd rather you trust the cameras than trust me, if it comes to that." He didn't check the footage. Not because he trusted her completely, he wasn't sure he did yet, but because some part of him already knew what he'd find and wasn't ready to feel guilty about having asked. The days that followed were strained in a way the household had never experienced before. Amelia kept working, precise as always. Ethan kept watching her, uncertain as he'd never let himself be with anyone in his own house. Neither of them mentioned the chair beside his bed again, but it stayed there, unmoved, a quiet accusation neither of them was ready to name. One evening, she left a glass of water on his nightstand without being asked, exactly the way she had every night for 3 weeks. He almost told her not to bother anymore. He didn't. What bothered him most wasn't the possibility that she'd hurt him. Some part of him had already ruled that out, faster than his temper wanted to admit. What bothered him was that she clearly knew something he didn't, and had decided, on her own, that he wasn't ready to hear it. Ethan hired a private security consultant, quietly, to review the mansion's cameras and go through his own medical records with fresh eyes. What came back confirmed his worst instinct. Someone had been tampering with his nightly supplements. Small, careful adjustments. Nothing that would show up in a routine test, but enough, over weeks, to explain the fainting, the breathlessness, the nights his own heart seemed to forget its rhythm. The consultant's report was careful, clinical, and completely unambiguous. Someone with regular access to Ethan's private bathroom had been altering his supplements for at least a month. It wasn't an accident, it was deliberate. Ethan brought the report straight to Amelia. "You knew," he said. It wasn't a question. Amelia's composure, for the first time since Ethan had known her, wavered, not into panic, but into something more like genuine reluctance. "I found the same thing you just found." Almost 2 weeks ago, Amelia had run her own quiet checks first. Timestamps, small inconsistencies in his morning routine, the kind of details a woman paid to notice details for a living would naturally catch before anyone else in the house even thought to look. "And you didn't tell me?" "I was protecting someone," she said quietly. "Just not the someone you're assuming." "Who?" Ethan asked. "Protecting who?" Amelia looked at him for a long moment before she answered. "I wasn't protecting you," she said. "I was protecting someone else." Ethan's mind went immediately to the worst possibilities. A rival, a lover, someone Amelia cared about more than she'd ever let herself care about him or his safety. "So you'd let me collapse again," he said, "to protect somebody else's secret?" "I never let you collapse again," Amelia said. "That's the entire reason I was in that chair." It wasn't the answer he wanted. It was, he realized slowly, the only answer that actually made sense. She'd found a way to protect both things at once, buying time she never explained she was buying. "I need a name," Ethan said. Amelia hesitated, longer than she had all night. "Not yet," she said. "Not until I know you won't do something you'll regret the second you hear it." "That's not your decision to make," Ethan said. "No," Amelia agreed. "But it's the one I've been making every night for 2 weeks, and you're still alive. I'd like a little credit for that before you take the decision back." It took Ethan 2 more days of quiet pressure, and Amelia finally relented. Not because he demanded it, but because the danger had gotten too large for one person to keep managing alone. The name was Julian. Julian Blackwood, Ethan's half-brother, 12 years younger, a relationship that had never fully recovered from a childhood spent on opposite sides of their father's attention. Julian had spent most of his adult life on the edges of the family, invited to holidays, excluded from everything that mattered, watching Ethan inherit not just the company, but every ounce of their father's attention along with it. Ethan sat down hard when he heard it. Amelia explained what she'd pieced together. Julian, buried in gambling debt for over a year, had been approached by someone offering to erase it entirely, in exchange for small, seemingly harmless favors. Swap this bottle, adjust that dosage slightly. He'd been told, and had apparently believed, it was nothing worse than a prank meant to embarrass Ethan in front of the board. He hadn't understood, not fully, what he was actually doing to his brother's body until it was already well underway. When Amelia confronted him privately, she said, he'd been sick with fear, not of getting caught, but of what he'd actually done, once someone finally explained to him in plain terms exactly what those harmless adjustments could do to a man's heart. Ethan found Julian that same night, in the guest wing where he'd been staying for months, ostensibly between apartments. 12 years, Ethan said, standing in the doorway. "I gave you a job, a place to stay, more chances than I gave anyone else in my life. And you were poisoning me." Julian didn't deny it. He didn't try to soften it either. I didn't know how bad it was, he said. Not at first. By the time I understood, I was too far in to know how to stop, or who to tell, or what would happen to me if I did. I kept telling myself I'd stop, Julian said. Every single time, and then he'd call again, and I'd think about the last threat he made, and I'd do it anyway. Who put you up to it? Julian's hands were shaking. I don't know his real name, just that he knew exactly how much I owed, and exactly how to make erasing it sound easy. And Amelia knew all of this, and said nothing to me? From the doorway behind him, Amelia's voice answered before Julian could. I said nothing because the moment you knew, you were going to react exactly like this, and neither of you would have gotten to the actual person responsible. Ethan turned to look at her, the anger in the room shifting, redirecting, not disappearing but finally finding a more useful target. It took another week, working together this time, instead of around each other, to trace the threats back to their source. Marcus Whitfield, a Blackwood Realty board member with a personal stake in a merger Ethan had refused to approve twice. An unstable, erratic Ethan, hospitalized, discredited, unable to reliably run board meetings, would have been exactly enough to tip the vote in Whitfield's favor. Amelia had suspected Whitfield for over a week before she said anything. Waiting, she admitted later, until she had something closer to proof than suspicion, unwilling to let Ethan's temper burn down the wrong target first. Julian hadn't been a co-conspirator. He'd been a tool, chosen specifically because Whitfield knew exactly which Blackwood was desperate enough and vulnerable enough to use. Ethan brought everything to the board himself: the security report, Julian's account, financial records tracing Whitfield's debt payoffs directly back to shell accounts linked to the merger. Whitfield resigned within the week, quietly, before the board could vote to remove him publicly. Ethan asked her, once it was all over, how she'd managed to keep working 2 full investigations at once, protecting him physically every night and quietly building a case against Whitfield during the day, all while still running his household exactly as precisely as she always had. I didn't stop doing my job, Amelia said. I just added one more thing to it. Julian wasn't prosecuted. Ethan made sure of that personally, on one condition: real help, real accountability, and an honest conversation between the two of them that was long overdue, regardless of anything Whitfield had ever done. The two brothers didn't fix 12 years of distance in a single conversation. But for the first time either of them could remember, they'd started. The household noticed the change before either of them said anything about it out loud. Fewer clipped instructions, more actual conversations. Ethan occasionally asking Amelia's opinion on things that had nothing to do with his health at all. Weeks later, the chair beside Ethan's bed was still there. Though he was sleeping through most nights now, the tampering long since stopped. His own doctors finally looped fully into his care. Amelia still checked on him some nights anyway. Old habits, she said, when he asked why. Why did you really do it? Ethan asked her one evening. All of it. The nights, the silence, protecting Julian, even when it would have been easier not to. Amelia considered the question longer than he expected. Because everyone in this house sees people as useful or not useful, she said. Your brother, me. Probably you, if we're honest. I decided a long time ago I wasn't going to be the person who only protected someone when it was easy. Ethan didn't have a clever answer for that. For once, he didn't try to find one. The chair stayed by the bed. Neither of them mentioned moving it. Sometimes the person watching over you isn't doing it because they were told to. Sometimes they're doing it because somewhere along the way, they simply decided you were worth watching over, even when you didn't know it, and even when protecting you meant protecting someone else first.